So just a quick background about myself. I don't like talking much about myself, but because some of you do not know me, I just like to cover it as a formality. I really do not like to talk about myself too much. So basically, I have a double major in psychology and economics from the University of Delaware. I grew up in Delaware. My kindergarten until my master's was all in the state of Delaware. And then I went abroad. I worked in Buffalo, New York at Islamic school there for about 7 years, Dar Ulum. Then I went abroad in the Middle East in Jeddah, worked there 10 years as a academic coordinator and a ESL teacher initially, then academic coordinator, teacher, trainer, etc. I also worked in Delaware at the Juvie Center. So I was a special education teacher there at the Juvie Center. I also conducted their evening Islamic studies program as a volunteer, as you can say, chaplain for the students in the Juvie Center in the evenings. And alhamdulillah, it was beneficial for the kids that were there. Some actually ended up accepting Islam later on as well. And currently I am the director of Bayaan Academy. I also am a certified public school teacher here in the state of Maryland. So I have a special education background. So I also am an IEP case manager and special ed teacher here in the state of Maryland as well. And of course, my kids were initially all homeschooled. My daughter, she's in 10th grade. She's also homeschooling at this time, being a dual enrolled student, studying at Bayaan and also taking some college classes. So we have two parts. Today, we're only going to be able to do part one, which is the high school checklist. Part two talks about career choices. We did this seminar for our students last year around April, May, about career choices that they might have. So we're not going to have time to do that today. But so today we're going to focus on part one, which is just making sure that as a high school student, you have everything you need in order, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so what's required for high school students? What do they need? This is a quick summary of what high school students should be having. Okay, this applies for homeschool students, as online students, as well as public school students in the state of Maryland. So this is specifically, that's why I put it MD, specifically for the state of Maryland. Other states calculate credits in a different way. So every state is unique. Some states may have a 23 credits. Some may have something like, for example, 46 credits. And that's just because, for example, in Maryland and Delaware as well, we count 1 year of high school English as one credit. But some schools may, for example, have a different numbering system. They might count 1 year of high school English as, for example, 2 credits. So when you see a school in a different state that says, 40 credits for graduation or 50 credits, don't think that your requirements are twice as high as other states. It's just that they're counting the credits differently. So that's just a caveat in case, people are concerned about that. All right. Any questions about the credits? Okay, we're going to get into the specific credits in a moment. So 21 credits, and we'll talk in the next slide about the breakdown. SATs is required, and I cannot emphasize enough how important SAT scores are, especially for kids that are studying in online school or homeschool. And we'll talk a little bit about the importance of SATs when we get to that slide. The next thing is the college essay. Almost all colleges require the students to write an essay. It's worth spending some time to make that essay good. This is something that's often overlooked by students. It's worth spending that time, having somebody proofread it, having, and it should not, of course, be plagiarized. It should be unique to your situation. Now, I'm just covering the generalities here. Each one of these can be a specific session on its own, if we get into it. But one of the things now they've done is something called a Common App / Common Essay. So many years ago, a student who wanted to apply to, let's say, University of Maryland and also wanted to apply to University of California, Berkeley, he'd have to fill out 2 separate applications, submit 2 separate essays, and it was, quite an exercise to, fill out applications to different colleges. And why would a student want to apply to more than one college? Well, if you don't get into the first one, at least you have a plan B in place. So it's always advisable for students to submit their essays, or rather their admission, applications to more than one college, have a plan B or C in place as well. So now what's happened with the Common App, it's an online app, basically. You apply to a number of colleges with one application. It's made it a lot easier for students. And that essay also gets sent, and along with that, letters of reference. And we'll talk about letters of recommendation. So these 3 things are essentially the core requirements. Now, each university or college may have additional requirements, and we'll talk about that. For example, letters of recommendation. Some colleges, universities require letters of recommendation. Some it's optional. Regardless whether it's required or not, I advise all high school students to get some letters of recommendation from their teachers, or if they're working somewhere, from their boss. And the reason is that whether you need it or not, you don't know. And this letter of recommendation can play a very important role in your admission process. Now, don't wait till your 12th grade year to go back to your 9th grade year teacher who really liked you a lot. I mean, who was, you worked really hard, for example, let's say in a history class, and you had some projects that you worked on with that teacher, and the teacher had good things to say. Well, in your 9th grade year, get that letter of recommendation while you're there. If you go back 3 years later, they may not remember who you are, or they might. Asking your teachers for letters of recommendation is a very standard process. It's common. Asking if you are volunteering somewhere on an extended basis, like you spent, several months or a year or so working there, you can also ask them for letters of recommendation and tell them what it's for. I'm applying for colleges in this particular major. Can you tweak that letter of recommendation to sort of highlight those things that I'm applying for? So let them know what you need it for and what you're planning to do. And I think many of them will be happy to comply. Now, nobody is obligated to give you a letter of recommendation, right? But I mean, it's a good thing. And of course, approach those teachers who you did well in. Get them while you're fresh in their memory. AP courses and ACT scores. AP courses are basically high school courses that are geared towards a exam that you take, which gives you college credit if you get a score that's high enough. So for example, it's called advanced placement. So we have college preparatory courses, honors courses, and then advanced placement, AP courses. The material is very similar. So let's say an AP biology course would be very similar to a 9th grade biology course. The only difference would be that it would cover a little bit more material. The language would be the textbook, or the material will be written at the college level, at the collegiate level. So the textbook or the reading materials will be a little bit more challenging. But the content, the biology concepts will still be pretty much the same, right? It's just a little bit more rigorous course of study. So once you take that AP course, at the end, the College Board offers the AP exam. You take the AP exam, and if you get a score that's high enough, that will actually give you college credits. And so you can take, so when you apply to college, you can actually send your AP scores over to the College Board. Now, there's a new trend starting. A lot of students take the AP courses with no intention of taking the AP exam, which is fine. You could do that. And so the reason they're doing that is because they're saying the colleges look favorably on the transcript that they have AP courses there. So it looks good. Even though if they didn't take the AP exam, just having an AP course title shows colleges that you are college ready, or you're college bound, or you're motivated to do well. Okay. Volunteer work experience. So, and I'm going to lump that with community service hours. So in the state of Maryland, the Board of Education requires 75 community service hours for public school students. All right, so that's a requirement for public school students. That's not a requirement for private schools or homeschool students. Nevertheless, I strongly advise community service hours. Now in PG County, in Maryland, where I teach, the school requires only 24 service hours, 24 community service hours. And so I asked, how can it be that Maryland State requires 75 and the school is only requiring 24? And the answer to that was that about 51 hours are built into the coursework. So students in high school who take classes throughout the year, indirectly or directly, they're getting some kind of community work, service kind of work experience built into it. How that is, I am still not clear. I haven't gotten a clear answer about it, but 51 hours in PG County in Maryland are built into the coursework. So students only got to do 24 hours of field service for community service. But I strongly advise high school students to work in their localities. Now, community service hours for the public school students, at least, it has to be a service that's a general service for the people at large. It can't be a faith-based service. So for example, if you're helping somebody with Jummah prayer, parking, inshallah, once the masajid open up, may Allah make it sooner than later, and make it easy for all the Muslimin. But so somebody volunteers every Friday, for an hour, and it does this for 24 Jummahs, right? That would not count for community service because it's for a specific faith. So it has to be something general. So for example, if the masjid has a food shelter or food bank service, right, which is open to everyone, that volunteer work could count for community service hours. Okay, and then the big question here, state assessments. This last point here, this is a huge question that a lot of people have about, you know, that, let me go back to that, sorry. Do I have to take the PARC exam or the HSA, or now it's called the MCAP exam? Do I have to take these state assessments? And particularly, this is in the state of Maryland. If you live in New York State or California, these state assessments may have a different name. So I'm not talking about SATs. These are localized high school state assessments. The question is, do students studying in private schools, online school, homeschool, do they have to take state assessments? And that's a big question a lot of people have. And the clear-cut answer is no, they do not. They are exempt from it. So state assessments are actually only for public schools. They're required actually only for public schools. And that is because public schools want to know, you know, the funds that they're investing, the millions and millions of dollars that they're churning out every year into the cost of the building, you know, the building rental or the cost of the building, the teacher salaries and the support staff. What is that money that the taxpayers' dollars are pumping into the school system? What are they getting us? How are our students doing? Do they have the basic English scores, the basic math abilities, right? Proficiencies in math? Are they getting that? So the purpose of state assessments is to gauge basically the return on investment, if I can use a financial term, the return on investment that the school is putting into the school system, public school education system. Private schools, online schools, and people that are homeschooled, in many ways, they're alleviating the burden of the school system by providing these students education themselves. So they are not required to do this because they're not taking funds from the government, for example, or, you know, it's not a public entity. However, you are welcome to participate in state assessments if you want to. So in New York State, for example, it's the Regents exam. It just came to me now, the Regent exam. If you wanted to participate and see how is my child doing compared to other New York State students, you can actually ask the school and register your homeschool child to take the Regents exam on site. Same likewise in Maryland. If you wanted to take the HSA, you can contact your nearest school to you, your local educational agency, they call it LEA, your local educational agency, contact them and say, hey, I want my child to take the HSA exam or the MCAP exam, and you would be allowed to do that. You know, and so you can see where your child is locally in comparison to other students. These scores aren't used anywhere else. As far as I know, they're not used. For example, you wouldn't send this to a college, but in some cases, in certain states, these can be used for scholarships, right? If you get like an exceptionally high score where you scored in the top 5 or 10 percentile, possibly some of these scores could be used for scholarships, but that varies from state to state. So now about the credits. This is specifically for Maryland, and like I said, but this is generally the trend for pretty much New York State as well as Delaware and Maryland. Generally, most states in America have the similar requirements, give or take 1 credit here or there. So across the board, students got to take 4 credits of English. Now notice I'm not saying 4 years of English. I'm saying 4 credits of English. 3 credits of math. So this is specifically Maryland. 1 has to be in algebra, 1 has to be in geometry, and an additional 1. Now colleges may have their own requirements. Like for example, some colleges say, well, after geometry, we want you to take algebra 2 as well. We want to see that on your transcript. Some colleges may require that. So generally speaking, the sequence that most high schools have set up is algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, and then the 4th math can be anything. Okay, 3 credits in science, and it has to be biology. 1 of them has to be biology. The other 2 can be any science. It can be physical science, earth and space science, physics, environmental science, etc. So the other sciences can be anything, but 1 has to be in biology. That's required in the state of Maryland, right? So and like I said, in many states, this is pretty much, because I worked in New York State for 6-7 years, it's comparable. I don't know what's happening now. It was about 12 years ago since I last worked in New York State, but this is, you know. And then social studies. So in Maryland, you need 3 credits in social studies, 1 in US history, 1 in world history, and then 1 additional 1. Now, it's strongly advisable in Maryland to take government, national and state government. It's called LSN, local, state, and national government. It's essentially a government course. So, you know, if they haven't taken, a lot of senior classes basically focus on government anyways. Here at Bayaan Academy, our seniors do take a government course, you know, because it's strongly advisable, but they're not required. So the state of, now those of you in other states, I would strongly advise you to visit your Department of Education's website and look at non-private schools or homeschool kids and see what their requirements are, okay? So we said we need 21 credits here. These are the core academics. These add up to about 13 if my math is correct, right? So the 13 credits, what are the other 8 that we need? So this is the core, and this is what everyone really focuses on. But there are other sets of requirements that we need to knock out as well before a student can get a high school diploma. Okay, so those additional credits in Maryland are art, health and PE, technology, and any other 2 credits here. So let's break this down. And I'll talk specifically about Bayaan Academy online school. So a lot of online schools have a accredited curriculum for art, PE, and technology. So in Bayaan specifically, for example, we have some students that are taking health and PE online. We have a couple of students who have already completed it. How does that work? Well, the curriculum is there. So you talk about good health and technique. And then there's a log students are required to keep about their fitness, what they're doing. And they self-report that log to the teacher. And so there is an online gym class that's accredited, for example, particularly a band that students can take. So not to worry about that. Kids who are homeschooled, parents will make the curriculum for them, which means that they would have some routine that covers the key components of gym, of physical education. So it's not like, my kids play in the background and that's physical education. You would have to sort of structure the language so it seems academic, right? Like that's an organized activity, not a undirected individual activity. So this is specifically for homeschool kids, right? Like, you get a coloring book for your child, let's say high school, get a coloring book and say, well, my son's doing art. That wouldn't qualify as art credit. So there has to be some kind of curriculum if you're homeschooling. Now, calligraphy, for example, would be considered art. So art doesn't mean that you have to draw pictures of living things or things that are contradictory to our faith. There are actually lots of other venues of being artistic, right? So there's calligraphy and there's Islamic art and other things that one can be involved in. With Bayaan Academy Online, the art class is basically art history. And so it talks about like through the ages, the different art forms and how they evolved. And so I've looked at that course briefly. I didn't see anything that was objectionable. 2 students here that are 11th, 12th grade have taken that course, and I asked them for feedback, and there was nothing apparently objectionable in that was problematic. So alhamdulillah, I'm happy to hear that. Also, you can also ask your child to be exempt, for faith-based reasons. So, for example, in public school, my wife, when she was in public school, her parents sent a letter saying that, look, your gym class is mixed, it's co-ed, and our religion doesn't allow co-ed mixing for, sports like that. So we want our daughter to be exempt from it, and she was exempt. So based on, I currently have a student in the public school I'm working at. She's not a Muslim, but her parents are submitted a letter to the school saying, my daughter, I do not want her to participate in gym because of her disability. So various reasons, even though the accommodations will be provided to a student with special needs in a gym class, but mom didn't feel comfortable, particularly because, and I can see why, particularly because in the gym you have this locker room situation, right? So in the locker rooms, people basically, strip down, change your clothes, and that can be very uncomfortable, especially if you have a child with disabilities, or if you're in your, in your religion and faith, exposing those private parts is quite problematic. So if your child is in public school, I think you would be entitled to have your child exempt from the gym class, right? And you'll have to supplement that with some other coursework that you could, come up with. So additional credits, we talked about art, health and gym, 1 credit. Technology could be any kind of technology class, and we have some online, and Bayaan, we have online technology courses that are there, programming as well as networking, etc. Then this is a big question. 2 credits in world languages. Okay, so world languages could be English, Spanish, French, and of course Arabic language, American Sign, or you can do American Sign Language, or some advanced technology program. Now this is a specific program in Maryland that students have to be involved in. So it's not any technology program, right? Or career readiness and development. So 2 languages are required, foreign languages or career readiness and development. And what that is, so in public school, for example, where I teach, and I'm telling you from, alhamdulillah, and I've been fortunate to be on both sides of the fence. And so this is why I can sort of serve as a resource to the community, where I'm working in public school, and I've been through the homeschooling process and dealing with homeschooling umbrellas, and worked in Islamic schools as well. So I'm seeing things from different sides. And so in the public school, for example, there are a number of students who do not take a foreign language. They take a course called Career Readiness and Development. And so that's a two-part course. It's 2 credits. One credit talks about different careers that students basically teaches you about different jobs that are out there, right? So you survey different jobs, you job shadow, you have field trips, etc. Then the second part of the course is work experience. So the student would actually get a job and they'd have to complete a certain number of hours. I believe it's 200 hours of work experience or something like that. So that's an alternate track to the language requirement. Okay, so some of you wonder, so there are lots of exceptions to the rule, but if you're college bound, the general standard is that you would take a foreign language. Okay. Now, Bayaan Academy has partnered with, for example, and I'm speaking to ourselves, partnered with Ilm Academy and particularly Ink Academy. And so those students who are studying there, taking their Arabic program, that would count. We can accept that transfer credit at Bayaan Academy as a foreign language requirement. Any other institute that has a authentically, rigorous language program, we will accept that transfer credit. So certainly Ink Academy and Ilm Academy have a very rigorous Arabic program, taught by highly qualified scholars. So that's something that definitely we would recognize and accept those credits. So those students go take those credits there and transfer them to Bayaan if they're with us, not a problem at all in these institutes. And other institutes that have likewise, we will accept it from there as well. As long as they have, like I said, established curriculum and qualified teachers, we would also take their credit. Now, what about homeschool? So we'll talk about homeschooling. That's a whole separate seminar. And inshallah, I do plan to do a homeschooling workshop down the road, partnering with another institute in Maryland. It's called Home, right? And so I will share the website at the end. It's run by Dr. Yahya and Sister Nahia. And I will share their website with you guys as well. They're based in Maryland, doing this for some time. And so we're going to have a panel with them as well. That's a separate discussion. We'll talk more so, inshallah ta'ala. But if you have any specific questions, feel free to jump in. All right, we're going to move on. Yes, absolutely. You can take more than one language, certainly. And in fact, it doesn't even have to be 2 years of the same language. In Maryland, particularly, they've made a change in the rules. So you could take, for example, 1 year of Arabic and 1 year of Spanish, and that counts as 2 years of your foreign language requirement. It does not have to be Spanish 1, Spanish 2, or Arabic 1, Arabic 2. All right, Brother Qaiser is here. He's an SAT prep expert, right? So SATs, basically there's just a breakdown. For students that are studying online, in private schools, or homeschool, I cannot overemphasize the importance of a good SAT score. All right, why? So let me give you a scenario. There's a student in a small, rural area of America, let's say out in, Iowa, and no offense to any Iowans here, right? But out in Iowa, some small rural area, in a farmland, right? And this student gets an A. Somebody's in Boston, right? In a Boston public school, in a very competitive environment where those kids are planning to go to, Harvard University or whatever, right? He gets an A. Well, how do we know if these two, now curriculum-wise, the Iowa has one curriculum and Massachusetts would have one curriculum, right? How rigorous are those classes? How competitive are those classes, right? They both got an A, one from a farm town and one from, Boston, right? Both got an A. Let's say both graduate with a 4.0 GPA. How do we know their aptitude level? How do we compare the proficiencies? So the SAT is what basically is called a standardized achievement test. That's what it stands for. SAT, standardized achievement test. And what it does is that it takes all of the people, right, at that time who tested and standardizes their scores. And so now we have a 4.0 GPA from Iowa and a 4.0 GPA from Boston, but we look at the SAT scores now. So schools will look at that, say, well, the kid from Iowa, got, let's say, 1,500. He did really, really well. And the kid from Boston, he got 900, not as good, right, as the kid from Iowa. So even though this kid was a competitive area, whatever, for whatever reasons, he had a high GPA, but he didn't do so well on his SATs. This kid in Iowa did really well on SAT. So so even though we would say, oh, the kid from Iowa, probably went to easy high school, we realized his aptitude, his achievement test was much higher. He would be given preference, the kid from Iowa with the 1,500 SAT score, over the kid in Boston who had a 900. Okay. So SATs are very important because that's the only way schools can sort of standardize the the the, the achievement of the students. So there are a lot of routes to SATs, right? And so one is paid on-site online courses. The biggest thing is that one, the material is generally better because you're paying for it. So, the material will generally be better quality. But the most important part of it is that it requires you to have a dedicated time to study, right? You've set aside a time to go to class, whether it's online or on site. You've paid for it. So, and now you're going to be there, right? So now every week for 3 hours a week or whatever it might be, you have that dedicated time to log in and make sure the SAT prep gets done, right? Now, if you're doing it on your own, that may happen. That may not happen, right? So that's one of the benefits. The third is you get personalized feedback from the instructor, right? So as you're doing your work, you're gonna get feedback. You're gonna get encouragement. SAT prep is not like a 1 month course, really. I mean, to do well in SATs, it's a year-long process, right? At least a year-long process. And so, and some students do it over the course of 2 years, right? But if you're a junior and you haven't done, that's fine. Then you can do a crash course in 3 months or 6 months, right? But if you're in 10th grade, I would say for most students to start the SAT prep in the middle of the 10th grade. All right. Why do I say that? SAT has 3 components, right? Well, let's start with the 2 core components. SAT has a math portion and an English portion. Okay, so the English portion is something that you can study for in 9th and 10th grade. How is the exam structured, analogies, etc. That's something that you can study ongoing. But the problem becomes in the math portion of the SATs because the SATs are primarily based on the 3 subjects. Most of it is Algebra 1 and Geometry. All right, for the math portion of SATs, most of it is Algebra 1 and Geometry and a little bit of Algebra 2 and some statistics, etc. But the bulk of it is Algebra 1 and Geometry. So typically freshmen take Algebra 1 the 9th grade year. Unless you're in advanced math, that's a different story. But typically, majority of the high school students take Algebra 1 the freshman year and Geometry in the 10th grade year. Now, if you start studying for SATs for the math part in 9th grade, I'm afraid you might feel demotivated because you don't have the math skills to really work on that math SAT portion, right? Because you're just starting Algebra 1 and the test begins with Algebra 1. When you're in 10th grade, at least you've got Algebra 1 under your belt and you're halfway through your geometry course. So it's the middle of 10th grade year. So you have some understanding of geometry. Now you have enough fundamental math skills to actually do meaningful studying of the SAT math program. So, and again, the key time to take the SAT is in your 11th grade year, in the spring of your 11th grade year. That's when most people take the SATs, in the spring of the 11th grade year. Unless you're looking for early admission or whatever, you can take it in the beginning of 11th grade year. But so I would say middle of 10th grade year is a time to study. And you can study from middle of 10th grade year and through that summer. If you do intensive study in the summer, you can take the SATs at the end of your 10th grade summer year, meaning beginning of your 11th grade year. Okay, that's just a core study. And of course, once you take the SAT exam prep courses, they'll talk more about that, right? But just give you an idea that you don't want to start too early because you might feel demotivated, right? So that's the paid courses. I think there's a lot of benefit to that. There are prep books as well. So prep books are, they're inexpensive, $40 or $80, depending on what you go for. You can get it. The benefit is that parents can see you doing the work. So if there's an online program, for example, you buy an online Kaplan course, or at Bayaan Academy, we also actually have an online SAT course. It's not too expensive either, by the way, through Apex. So kids are online, but parents might not know, is my child on task or off task, right? And that's always the issue with online studies. So if you have a book version, it's not the ideal situation, but at least parents can monitor the work that's being done. If it's a physical book, every day you can say, okay, what did you do? And you can take a look at that. But I am a strong proponent of online SAT prep. Why? Because there's the diagnostic tool. So you focus only on those aspects of the SAT exam that you are weak in. So you wouldn't necessarily spend a lot of time on Algebra 1 if that's solid, and rather you would focus on, for example, some components of geometry that you're weak in, right? So I'm a strong proponent of online test prep, particularly, right? Books have like I said, books have their value, and this is just a summary. I'm trying to get in one slide. This is not a SAT prep course today, but some just general guidelines for students that are in high school. KhanAcademy.org has a free account. It's actually really, really good. They have a lot of test prep material there. You can make an account. at Khan Academy. They'll give you a diagnostic test, which is a pre-test, and see your weak spots, and then they'll give you problems in math and English to focus on those parts that you're weak at. I think that's a great place to start your SAT prep for free of cost. It's a great resource. Some of the explanations can be more engaging, more interesting, certainly, but it's free, right? So it's a trade-off. Now, one thing I will say about SATs, even if you're not college bound, meaning that for whatever reason you have no interest in going to a public university. So for example, after your high school completion, you want to join a full-time alim program, you know, a Sharia program in USA or abroad, and you're like, I'm not going to college. I'm gonna do a what's equivalent to, let's say, a minimum master's in Islamic law from one of these institutes, right? Like Inc. Academy or Ilm Academy. That's essentially equal to a master's program, at the very least a bachelor's level program. So, and the person has no desire for that reason, or the person is, you know, financially they think that, you know, I'm not going to be able to afford college and I don't want to go into debt for it, or they have family businesses, whatever number of reasons might be that the student has no interest in going to college, right? Regardless of your interest of going to college or not, all high school students before they graduate should take the SATs, hands down. Why am I saying this? Because once you take the SATs, it's done, it's there. You might change your mind 5 years down the road. You might change your mind 10 years down the road. Imagine, you know, 5 years down the road, you change your mind, right? You got your alim degree, you got your business going on, you know, with the family business or whatever that might be. 5 years down the road, you change your mind. And you say, well, you know, I want to, you know, go to college. Well, 5 years later to study for the SATs is going to be a nightmare. Imagine 5 years later trying to go back and study Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, right? The math portion. The English portion, you might be okay, right? I think that's not going to be too difficult for many of you, right? I mean, your English will only get better because we're seeing language all around us. But math, because it's more theoretical, we don't really work with it on a regular basis, right? So regardless of your future plans, all high school students, before they graduate, should take the SAT prep or the SAT exam, regardless. Good score, bad score, doesn't matter. And I'll tell you one thing, a personal story about me, and which really surprised me. When I was applying for my teaching license, right, there's an exam that all teachers got to take. It's called the Praxis exam. Praxis 1, which is called Core Skills, which covers basically English reading, writing, and math. That's Praxis 1. And then Praxis 2 is for your specific subject. So whether special education or biology. So every teacher in America and USA, every certified teacher has to take the Praxis 1 and the Praxis 2, two sets of exams. Well, to my surprise, I found out that if your SAT scores are high enough, you can be exempt from the Praxis 1. So surprisingly, and I'm going to give my age away here, but you know, I took the SATs like 20 some years ago, right? 20 years ago or so, 25 years ago, maybe. All right. So I took it about 25 years ago. I called the college board, say, you know, do you have my SAT scores? And they said, we have in the archives. They sent it, to the Department of Education because my SAT scores were high enough, and the Department of Education exempted me from the Praxis 1 exam. A test I took 25 years ago saved me a lot of headache, a couple years back to get my teaching license. I never thought my SAT scores would be useful for anything other than college admission. But they came back, and I'm so grateful that I took, of course, we needed to take it back then for college. But 25 years later, I'm getting my return on investment on my SAT score. So I was exempted for Praxis 1, and all I had to do was take Praxis 2. And I'll tell you, number of teachers who lose their teaching license, or, many teachers can get a probational license, like a conditional license, in which you have like 2 years to get your credentials up to par for the state you're working in, whether it's Maryland or New York. They give you 2 years and say, hey, we'll give you a provisional license. You start teaching because we need teachers, for example, PG County or inner city, New York or Philly. You're required to take those 2 exams. The number one reason why most of those teachers lose that provisional license is because they can't pass the Praxis 1, right? Because it's just so much time has passed. So anyways, SATs, guys, college bound or not, before you graduate high school, sometime, 11th grade year, 12th grade year, take your SATs, and let it just sit there. Okay. We're getting towards the end of our presentation today, which is, we still have a little bit more, but I want to leave some time for Q&A. College admission. All right, different colleges have different college requirements. So I just picked 2 from the state of Maryland, all right? One is UMBC, and the other is Towson University. Because a lot of you are from Maryland, so I'm just picking two. Neither of these are, both of these are semi-competitive. University of Maryland, for example, is a little bit more competitive than these. And two things you have to remember when you apply to the college. It also depends on which program you're trying to get into. So for example, University of Maryland has one of the top tier programs in IT, right? And computer sciences. Why? Well, look around us, right? I mean, we got Langley Park here, we have the NSA here, you know, Pentagon is not too far away, you know, half an hour from University of Maryland. So all of these government agencies are around this area here, right? So NSA has their office right in Maryland itself, right? So in PG County. So because of that, there's a strong demand in this area for IT personnel. I'm not saying to work for any one of these agencies, right? But what I'm saying is that there's a strong demand for these professionals here. So that's why University of Maryland has become a very competitive school for IT. And so the requirement to enter UMD for IT are very high. But if you wanted to, for example, become a teacher or a gym teacher, right, the requirements are less competitive, right? Requirements are less competitive for that. So let me share the screen directly. I have the screenshot here for these schools, but I think it'll be better if I go directly to that site. This is UMBC's website. Again, yes, and like I'm mentioning, UMBC isn't as competitive UMD, but a little bit more competitive than Towson State University. And in your own states, you know, you have your own colleges that had similar kinds of requirements, right? So this is transfer, sorry. All right, so we're looking here. All right, so you can see on the website, UMBC, for example, requires 4 years, like we mentioned, like the state of Maryland. Now they added 4 years of math. Now, if you're graduating early, then certainly you wouldn't need 4 years of math. 3 years would be sufficient. You know, they want you to take Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 in UMBC, okay? I'll tell you a little bit about myself. When I was in high school, in public school in the state of Delaware, I did not like it at all. So I got out early. And so I finished my high school in 3 years. You know, basically I took some community college classes. Actually, I took classes at the University of Delaware over my summer break, and I took English there. And so basically I had my 4 years of English at the end of my 11th grade year. I already had 4 years of English. So I applied to University of Delaware while I was in my 11th grade year. They accepted me. So for my 12th grade year, I went straight to the university and did not need to go back to my public school. So, you know, there are ways around. If you, those of you who are in public school or online or homeschool, I mean, dual enrollment is a separate topic. We'll talk about that briefly. Dual enrollment. That's going to be towards the end of it. But you can take some, you know, summer classes. You know, if you're in 11th grade, you can take a summer class at a local community college, and that will give you a high school credit. So, for example, you take a IT class at CVCC or at HCC at Howard Community College or Baltimore Community College. You take, let's say, during the summer of your 11th grade year, you take an IT course, or let's say you take an English course, okay? That course will give you a full year of credit for high school and will also count as your college credit whenever you transfer it. Now, there's a caveat to that. I will talk about that if we have time towards the end of this in the Q&A. Just remind me in the Q&A session to talk about dual enrollment, the pros and cons of it. So that's one way that will give you a full, so one semester of a community college course will give you the whole year of credit for the high school, and it will sit there as a credit in your when you transfer to universities. To be dual enrolled, you just have, there's no requirement to be dual enrolled. Dual enrolled students are basically high school kids who are taking college classes for extra credit. Basically, you can think of it that way. And so all you need to do is the parents have to go in with the child and say, if you're homeschooled or if you're in public school or if you're in online school, just say, hey, my child is homeschooled or my child studies here. We want to be dual enrolled, and they will take you in. And if you go to your county and you register with the community college in your county, it's actually half the tuition price. Okay, so for example, in Howard County, for Howard Community College, it's about $380 for after taxes and all that stuff for one course. Okay, now I will mention there's one caveat real quickly, is that just because you took a community college class, a student takes, let's say it takes biology 100, right? So now they knocked out their science requirement for biology for high school, right? And they've got 3 credits. When they transfer, let's say they go into UMBC or UMD, they go there and they send their transcript over from, you know, Howard Community College or from CVCC, and they see, okay, biology 100, that four-year college will give you that 3 credits, but that credit may not help you graduate early. It's possible that credit might not help you graduate early. The reason being because it's a very low-level course. Okay, so let me give you an example. Somebody wants to do IT. They get into University of Maryland, right? Well, so during the 11th grade summer, they took a course in Pascal, right? It's a language, it's a programming language, which I took many years ago in high school, right? So that's fine. The credit's going to sit there. He took a college class, it's going to count. But that Pascal class is not going to help the student graduate any earlier because Pascal is not even like a prerequisite for anything these days, right? So just because you took a college credit, so let's say somebody takes 24 community college classes, right, at the high school level, great. He's got, almost 1 full year of college under his belt before he goes to the 4-year college. But those credits might not be useful for him to graduate early because a lot of them might be low-level courses. So they helped him to graduate early from high school, but not necessarily so you want to really strategize what kind of courses dual enroll students or homeschool students are taking at the community college level, right? If you're taking, and you have to know what the purpose is, and perhaps we can talk about dual enrollment down the road, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so we're at the UMBC website. All right, that's a fee for it. Okay, so it requires SAT scores as well, or you can do ACT scores in place of SAT. They also ask for letters of recommendation. You can see that here. So whatever your choice of university or college is, make sure you apply that. Now this is of course for their arts department. So if you're in dance or music or theater, they have their own separate requirements for the arts, right? So and you would click on that, and they'll give you some other requirements, like might want a video recording or something of what you want. Okay. Now particularly I want to mention this. We're here at the UMBC website, and so what you notice here is this: homeschool applicants. Right? UMBC welcomes homeschool applicants. In addition to the above admission materials, homeschool applicants should submit curriculum, basically whatever the curriculum was, course content, instruction material, etc. And the reason I want to really point this out is that a lot of people are concerned about online schooling or homeschooling. Well, here is directly from the website, right, at UMBC website, that they are acknowledging homeschooling as a valid form of education. So if your child never stepped foot in public school, that's okay. You would submit a homemade report card, right? This format's for it. You can look it online, and homeschooling umbrella organizations can help you with that as well. There are many of them around Maryland. And so you can actually apply as homeschool. So if somebody is sitting in an online school, right, like at Bayaan or somewhere else, we give you the transcript, but you can also have your homeschool report card and apply with that. So this is one of the things I wanted to mention to you guys here, that even homeschooling is a valid form that's recognized by American colleges. Now this is UMBC, right? I think their general admission is like 3.8. So high school GPA is very, very important. You really want to do well. Okay, they allow students with college credits. Sure. I mean, now if a student is taking a community college class, he's already demonstrated to the 4-year college that, look, I've taken college classes, I've done well, I'm college ready. Right? And really the crux of all of this is that from high school and with SAT scores, colleges want to know that, is this person college ready? Is he going to be successful? That's what they're gauging, right? So if you've taken community colleges, college courses, Brother Kaiser mentioned a good point here, you've already demonstrated that, look, I've taken college classes, I'm college ready. And so your chances of getting in are a lot higher. Absolutely. So that's UMBC. Towson is slightly less competitive. This is one of the best resources for college admission. U.S. News and World Report. It's one of the premier, and you can say in terms of ranking universities. They've been doing this for several decades now. Towson, to my surprise, was ranked number 197 in national universities. I was quite surprised that they were ranked that high, because don't hear much about it. Then I live in Maryland, right? So. But I think they had here their acceptance rate, I believe, is like 80%, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to find where it was here on one of the sites. So they accept about 80% of the applicants, right? Towson University. So if a student doesn't get into the choice 1, they have an option of applying to the choice 2, or there's an option that students can just go to local community college. Just go to your community college, do a year or 2 there, and then transfer to a 4-year college. All right. So this is UMBC. UMBC takes about almost 60% of their applicants, UMBC, okay? And they also have, I think, their average SAT scores. Let me go back to the presentation because it's more consolidated there. Bismillah. Okay. So at UMBC, they're saying their average score is 1275 for the SATs. All right, that's kind of high. But keep in mind that private colleges and public colleges are essentially a business. So the year you apply, if they have empty seats and you don't meet their minimum SAT requirement, there's still a possibility that you could get in if there's are fewer attendees that year. Don't feel that you're barred because let's say you got a SAT score of 1100. That does not mean that you're not going to be allowed into UMBC. This is the average SAT score. For example, at Towson here, okay, I don't have that here, but Towson, basically the average SAT score was about 1100. So they're, where did it go? Okay, I think it's gone from the slide here. But at Towson University, the average SAT score is about 1100. 25% of the people score below that and 25% score above that. So if you have a SAT score of 900, you're amongst that, quarter or so that could, let's say you have 1,000 score, you're amongst the quarter that will be accepted, right? So these are average scores. So some score a lot higher and some score a lot lower, right? So keep that in mind in averages. So there are a lot of people who are below that number, and there are also many that are above that number. That's just the average. So don't feel you didn't get that SAT score, you'll be barred from admission. All right, there's a second topic. I'm not going to spend much time on it because we are coming up to the hour, and I want to leave some time open for open-ended questions. This is that child find services. If you, in any state you live, this is a federal program for kids who have special needs. So the federal government, you can look up, and if you have a child with special needs, it's always good to get them identified early on. All right, and when they're in 3 years or 4 years, 5 years of age. So Child Find will help you with that. So just Google Child Find in your state. Private schools that receive special ed funding, Title II funds are called. Private schools who receive federal funding have to provide your child with special education services. Private schools that are not accepting federal funds for special education do not have to provide anything. So let's say there's an Islamic school or a Christian school who accepts government funding for different things like technology, etc. That's fine. They do not have to provide special education services. But if the school is accepting Title II funds specifically for special needs, then they're obligated by federal law to provide special education services for those students. So Title II funds, those of you who are running institutes, it's a pro, and it also comes with, so if you take those funds, there's a lot of positives because it's a lot of heavy funding there, but there's also challenges that you have to make sure that you have IEPs for each student, you have a special education certified individual who's monitoring IEPs, et cetera, for the students with the disabilities. Now for homeschoolers, well, I'm homeschooling my child, right? So what if my child has special needs and he's homeschooled? Do I get any services from the state? So Maryland, unfortunately, does not have any provision for homeschools kids. So let's say you have a child in middle school or high school, and he has special needs. So as a homeschooler, Maryland is not required to provide any kinds of services. State of New York does, however. So state of New York, in this sense, is a bit more progressive than Maryland. Nevertheless, you can contact your local school agency, your local nearest public school, and ask them if they can write an IEP for your child, or if you can if they can assess them. So school by school, there might be some room there in Maryland if you go school by school, okay? You would just have to contact the local school to you and ask them, like, look, I suspect my child has special needs, and this is why I suspect it. And so you can ask if they can write an IEP for you or not, so that'd be good. All right, so this is the crux of today's seminar. There's a part 2 to it, which is about your interest in picking a major. We had this workshop last year. We will have it again this year for our students in high school and even for middle school as well, how to pick a major, some of the tools they can leverage for that purpose. All right, so we're at the end of our session today. Any questions, guys? So let's go back to, let's open it for any questions you guys might have. So if you're applying to Ivy League schools, Ivy League schools are highly competitive. So you want to make sure that all the things that I mentioned here that were recommended in the checklist, such as a volunteer work, letters of recommendation. So you want to get letters of recommendation from your community leaders. You want to make sure you take some college courses during the summer, for example, of your 11th grade year or beginning of your 12th grade year. Take like a community college course. You can submit that so you can evidence that you've done it. have a portfolio, have things that indicate to the, so what they want to see are unique participants, right? So you want to have all of these things together, aside from your essentials that you have, the core requirements. Absolutely. For students that are applying to colleges, letters of recommendation can be, you can ask your teachers, in fact. So for letter of recommendation, I would advise you to ask your teacher. It would come from the teacher, not from the school directly. That's just how letters of recommendation work, right? So the GED path is also equally as good. GED stipulation in most states is that the child has to be at least 18 years of age before they can take the GED. I know one person in Maryland whose child was able to take the GED before the age of 18. They had to correspond with the Department of Education, and they were able to get it done. But generally the GED, so basically you can be completely homeschooled, take the GED when the child is 18, and that can, the GED can be used as a GED along with SAT scores are sufficient to apply for college admission. Now, if it's a competitive college, it might be challenging for a student with GED to get in. It can be very difficult. But if the GED student was dual enrolled and already took some community college courses, he might be able to get in. The second option is GED and then go to community college for 1 or 2 years. Evidence that, look, I did well in community college. I took 1 or 2 years and I did well, and apply for 4-year colleges. Now, I do want to say that a lot of people opt for community colleges, not just because they couldn't get into a 4-year college, but I know many people who got into 4-year colleges and did not go there, rather chose community college. And the reason being, well, number one, finances. Community college is a lot cheaper. So even for my own daughter, the plan is for her to go to a community college here. For example, Howard Community College, I think, is ranked like in the top 25 nationally as a community college. So it's a very good community college. So number one, you save a lot of money if you go to the community college of your county. Number two, classes are smaller. So it's a nice way for students to transition from homeschool, online school, or even public school to college. I remember my first semester at college, I struggled. And I went from, a class, having 20 kids in honors classes in high school to being, 200 kids in an auditorium. And the level of studies, I was very ill prepared for college when I went my freshman year, my first semester. I pretty much had to audit all my classes, because I just was not ready for being in such a huge environment. And the college, there's a huge jump really from high school academics to college academics. And so I personally wasn't ready for it, but community college is great that it sort of transitions you slowly to that. So number one, financial reasons, people choose it. Number two, smaller classes as well, And number three, of course, that it can serve to, if you didn't get into other colleges, right, then it can serve as a evidence that I've already done well. And so you can use those transfer credits over. Most colleges will accept up to 60 transfer credits, whether it's community college or some other college. It will accept up to 60 credits. I'll tell you a story about my cousins. My cousins from they came to America when they were, I think, were 16 or 17, and they went to a 4-year community college, a 4-year college rather, in America, a part of America that's not so competitive, a school that isn't that well known for anything. And so they went to a relatively easy college initially, right? An arts-based school. It was an art school. They went there for 2 years, and then they transferred to Stanford University, right? And then they got their PhDs at Stanford. So they started off their academic career at a very rural, no-name kind of art school, went there for about 2 years, and then transferred to Stanford University and did their bachelor's and PhD there. And that's two of my cousins who actually went that route that I know of directly. Both went to Stanford later on. GED under the age of 18, there are ways around it. You'll have to sort of speak to the Department of Education and see what they do. Like I said, I know one student who took it at 16. Generally, the reason it's there, I taught a GED course, and that was about 20 years ago. So my knowledge about the GED exam is quite antiquated. So don't take my word for it, double check. But one of the things that I used to have is that the student had to have dropped out of high school or not gone to school for about a year after his legal age. So in Maryland, students can opt to drop out of high school at the age of 16 with parental consent, right? So they can opt to drop out of school at 16. So if a student is not going to, does not go to school, let's say, since the age of 16, at 17, he could take the GED because he's been out for 1 year. Now, these numbers, again, double check them because I haven't taught a GED course in about 20 years. So it might be a 2-year stipulation, just double check. For example, New York State, by the way, the dropout age is 18. So before 18, a child cannot drop out. So if a 17-year-old is not doing homeschooling, online schooling, or going to public school, parents can be held legally liable for negligence. It's called truancy. right? So in New York State, a child cannot drop out before the age of 18. But in Maryland, last year they were thinking of raising the dropout age to 18. That was not passed. It was deferred. So Maryland still the age is 16. So if a child after the age of 16 does not go to school, parents will not be legally liable for that. GED is not required for attending college. If you have a high school diploma or a homeschooling transcript, right, you can use that for college. This is why specifically I showed you the UMBC website, right, that said homeschooling students, there's a special provision for homeschool kids. And I'll be honest with you, the reason they're acknowledged that 20 years ago, you would never find that in any college, right, the homeschooling provision. Maybe some college in California may have that, but you wouldn't, 20 years ago, you would not have seen that on any website where they have a special provision for homeschool students. The reason you're seeing it now is because colleges have realized homeschool students are very successful at the college level. They're responsible students, they do well, and they succeed. So quite to the contrary of 20 years ago, nowadays, colleges do look very favorably upon homeschool students. It shows that parents were engaged and involved, and the student is going to be responsible. That's why we're seeing that. So if a child didn't go to any online school, just did pure homeschooling, chances of getting to college are still very high. And I know several families in Maryland, in the Baltimore area, who did not do, who were purely homeschooled, and they got into UMBC at the age of 16, 17. Namely, my sister's kids. My sister's kids got into UMBC at the age of 16. Now, whether I advise students to go to college that early, that's a different story. But I think at 16, they're a bit mature. Same thing with community college. I wouldn't advise 14-year-olds to take community college classes unless it's something that's like IT based or something that's maybe science based, and you go drop the child off, sit outside the door for an hour, pick them up, bring them home, right? Because your 14-year-old is not going to be interacting with 19, 20, 21-year-olds. So I have personal serious issues with that, right? I mean, we know what's happening with the internet and social media and kids being vulnerable to all these negative influences out there. But if you do want to take that route, I'm not going to discourage you. What I would say is that make sure you have the safety protocols in place. And so if you take the child, like I said, go to that hour class, have mom or dad sit out there in the lobby area. When class is done, have the child come home. Once the child is 16, a little bit, matured, they worked out that biological hormonal stage, right, of that teenage years of between 13 through 15. They worked that out. They got their head sort of screwed on straight. They know what they're doing. No offense to you guys who are between 13 through 15, but I've taught thousands of students in my educational career, and so that is a tough age. Like hormones all over the place. You want to be an adult, but you can't do all the things adults do, and sometimes you want to be a kid, and then adults expect you to act like an adult when you're a kid. Right, so there's all this confusion that happens, and this is unfortunately the Western dilemma that we've created these teenage years. Whereas in going back 100 years ago, there was no concept of teenage year. Once you reach puberty, you were treated as an adult, and so it's very clear. Like I am an adult now; I'm held to adult standards. But that's a whole different discussion, right? So 13 through 15, it is a tumultuous age, and so if you are thinking of college, community college, just make sure you have safety protocols there for your kids. So the financial situation, it varies for each student to student. Keep in mind that when you go to community college, there is a risk that the four-year college may not accept your transfer credits. There's always a risk there, right? So it's a trade-off. Generally, if you've gone to community college, you've done well, the four-year college will accept you. And in fact, I'll be honest with you, the acceptance rates year by year are going up at the four-year colleges because now they have found other revenue streams such as online learning. Right. So now a lot of colleges are offering classes that are online, so they're not bound or confined to the capacity of an auditorium. So they can increase the revenue. Some of those participants who entered got a session today was a repeat session. Barakallahu feek. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa azwajihi wa tabi'in bi ihsan ila yawmiddin. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.